Yeah, we're getting some echo.
That fixed it. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Good morning, San Diego. Happy New Year. I'm Michael McSweeney, the Senior Public Policy Advisor at your BIA. And no, I'm not sitting in my luxury box at Cleveland Browns Stadium. I'm in the office. This is just my virtual background. Welcome to our seminar this morning, webinar. I want to introduce everybody. We've got, first off, Bill Ostrom. For those of you in the industry, you know Bill. He just retired as the president of the San Diego division of Lennar Homes. So now he's just a retired guy. We also have George Goshen, who is the, according to my notes, the interim deputy director of DSD Engineering Division. Also with him is Sean Torres. And last but not least is Lori Walsh, our friend from the Regional Water Quality Control Board. She's a senior water resources engineer, and she's in charge of everything stormwater, whether it's a construction permit, industrial permit, or the MS4 permit. So with that being said, the premise of this this webinar is Bill approached Bora and said, you know, I hear from a lot of division presidents and leaders of our industry that the regional board is such a problem to deal with. And he said, you know, I've developed a really good collaborative relationship, and I want to share what I did with Lennar and how we changed the paradigm with the regional board and our relationship. Not only that, but with the city of San Diego. And Bill kind of looks at it as a three-legged stool. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bill, and he's going to share with you how cooperation and collaboration has resulted in Lennar having less problems on site. And if there is a problem, how they jump on it and get it fixed. So Bill, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. Last but not least, if you have questions, I want you to put it in the question and answer box. Each panelist is going to get a few minutes to kind of give their story. Then we're going to do Q&A. I'm going to stop 7 minutes before the end of the hour, so our panelists can have a final thought. And then if we still have questions and you want to stick around, all our panelists will stick around to finish the Q&A. So that way everybody will get your questions answered. And with that, Bill, the floor is yours. Hold on. Your mic is not working. You need to unmute yourself.
Is it working now?
Try hanging up the phone, and then you won't get the echo.
You're still echoing?
If you also have a phone line open, you need to cancel the phone line.
I'm good.
Yeah, we still have it.
Is that working now?
That works perfectly.
Sorry about that, guys. As I was starting, the reason we're here today is to, I'll say, learn from my mistakes or my experiences and really dispel a lot of issues that are out there, concerns that are out there, and hopefully give you some advice on how to address challenges that may come out ahead of you. But I thought maybe first I'd give you the background of what brought me here and what really fostered the relationship with the regional board and also the city as it relates to our SWIP and our compliance. So we purchased a mining operation site that we were going through remediation to develop 1,800 home sites called Three Roots in the Sereno Valley area. And during that, we went through our due diligence and we were advised that we could just continue the remediation program that was underway. And let's just say we didn't get good, solid advice, which resulted in the regional board and the city noticing us that we're in violation of pretty much everything. So what we did, like most of us all do, we consulted attorneys, but I was getting so much misinformation or misdirection from, I'll say, our attorney and consultant staff that I decided just to arrange for a meeting with Lori Walsh and her team at the regional board. So we went and had a face-to-face meeting with Lori. And after she spent about a half hour telling me everything that I've done wrong and that I should be, as the biggest builder in town, that I should know what the proper thing is. I sat there and I listened. And what Lori's message really was is she was looking for clean water. That was the bottom line. So, as we were adjourning the meeting after, everybody speaking their different points, I went up to Lori and I told her, I'm going to be your poster child for water quality in county. And, I left that afternoon, sat down with the team, and I said, this is what we're going to do. And we're going to open up communication and we're going to stay focused on what we need to do to make sure that there's clean water in all the areas in which we're developing within the county. Then as a follow-up, what I did is I set up another meeting with Lori and asked, how do we best maintain an open communication between the teams, meaning our, in-house compliance people, and then also our field people along with her team. And we put a meeting together, and unexpectedly, but turned out to be a great thing, Lori and her team actually went out and walked every one of our properties. I think it was some 15 or 18 different communities that we had open with construction activity. And we sat down and went through each one of those sites and discussed, the what's being done right, what's being done wrong. And at the end, it all came down to how do we best communicate. We've got field people, we've got office people, everybody's interpreting things a little differently, but how do we get everybody on the same page to reach that objective of really just provide, making sure that clean water is maintained. And one of the things that I took away from our second meeting, which meant a lot to me, Lori made the comment to me, she goes, construction is not perfect. They're going to find things wrong occasionally. And all they're really looking for is that we take care of them. We address them, we, silt fence, whatever those things are, to make sure that we've got the sites really tight. So again, I went back, talked to my team, and actually had my team with me in that meeting with Lori, and everybody walked away with a great feeling that we were going to be able to communicate and work together. And it really changed, I think Michael called it the paradigm, at least in our heads, as the way we thought the two groups work together. And I told my team, you just say focus on what we're supposed to do with those plans that we get approved, and also stay in communication. And that has just paid off just greatly. It's changed everything. One of our partners, other builder partners on Three Roots, was the Shea builder, or Shea Homes, and Paul Barnes, is the partner there. And he had heard me talk about the relationship that we developed in solving our challenges at Three Roots. And he asked me, how do I develop that relationship? So since then, I've also put him in contact with Lori. They've developed a relationship and are doing the same thing on properties they have throughout the county. And he's, as recent as yesterday, we were talking about it, and he says it's just worked out to be so great for everybody. And the benefit is, we all have a bunch of challenges as we develop property, build homes, grade and develop communities. Is, we have not run into one job shutdown since we entered this relationship. We've had our job sites are more efficient. There's a better understanding from our people in the field as what the expectations are in complying with the plans and how those are addressed when any of the inspectors actually come out on site. And then the end result is we've actually saved some money because we haven't overdone those corrections. We've corrected what we needed to correct, not with the open communication, we didn't overcorrect. We corrected to what the plan was. So it turned out to be a positive thing also financially. So, really what I wanted to share with you guys is that, the myth of communication or relationship with the regional board, and then also the city's, challenge is that they're the enforcer of all these things. A little communication goes a long way. And just know that the people on the other side are willing to listen, and they've got their goals and objectives. And what we're all trying to do is, reach our respective goals and objectives, but together we'll find a way to achieve all those. And it's not as hard as you think. And always know that those people on the other side are much more receptive to listening. And, thanks to Lori and her team for being receptive, and the city listening. We've been able to turn this Three Roots challenge that we had into a positive long-term plan for Lennar. And now Shay has adopted it, and I would hope that all of you would also adopt that level of communication and know that there are receptive parties on the other side. And I guess now we'll pass it on to Lori. Michael?
No, we'll actually go to George, and
sorry.
we saved the best for last. Okay.
Yeah. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Bill, for the info and the coordination. Coordination typically, it's something that we all have to take into consideration on these type of projects, because it will save a lot of time and money for all of us. Again, my name is George Gossain, Interim Deputy Director with the City of San Diego Development Services Department. I'm going to take an opportunity today to introduce Sean Torres, who is our Senior Engineer at Development Services Department, overseeing the stormwater and floodplain section. I know a lot of you previously coordinated with Walter Geffram. Sean has replaced Walter, who's no longer with the city. So he will be your point of contact on these type of issues. Protecting water resources and watersheds within the region and the city of San Diego is one of the city's top priorities. And to best protect our waters, the city consistently makes sure that the appropriate stormwater guidelines are in place and updated as needed through very, very rigorous and detailed coordination between the city and the Regional Water Quality Board. Granted that in some cases, as you all know, depending on the project, sometimes what we deal with is case-by-case situations where some of the guidelines are vague or needs some clarifications. And that's where it's critical for applicants to really reach us and reach out to us at the city or at the board for assistance to ensure compliance, with local and regional guidelines. For the city, it's always critical for us to really coordinate with Lori, and that's been the trend, making sure that we're all on the same page. And now that, as Bill mentioned, it's critical for the applicant as well to really be part of the team, because to succeed, we have to collaborate and coordinate consistently on these projects. Sean and I will be available to answer any questions, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to Lori Walsh. Lori?
Okay, thank you. All right, so I'm going to let you know how the water board found itself here and give you a little bit more of the details and share with you some of the expectations from the board with regards to the construction stormwater program. So really, the board went out to do notice of termination inspections under the industrial general permit for the couple of, I think it was an asphalt site and a concrete batch plant site in that area. And when we did those inspections, there was a lot of activity, grading going on one aspect of the site. And when my staff came back and tried to figure out what was going on out there, we recognized that there was grading occurring on the site, long story short, without CGP coverage. And it had turned out that because the site was a reclamation site it had a SWIP under the industrial general permit, but did not, but there's a point in time when the grading switches from grading under a reclamation activity, which is an industrial activity, to grading under a construction activity. And that's where I think the city might be able to jump in later on and give some specifics, or if questions hit those areas, we'll deal with those. But so we found out that there was grading going on without a CGP. And after further investigation into that, we decided to send a notice of violation to Lennar and the Three Roots group for grading without construction general permit coverage. And also part of these activities, not only does an individual LRP under the construction general permit have responsibilities, but the municipality within which the activities are occurring have responsibilities under the regional MS4 permit. So once we recognized that there was grading occurring without a CGP, that triggers requirements under the regional MS4 permit. And we found the city in violation of failing to require the grading, require receipt of CGP coverage, which is required under their regional MS4 permit for the same area. So I think you get the picture. So the regional board sent a notice of violation to the city of San Diego for failure to comply with the regional MS4 permit under their construction general permit component. So those were the two notices that were issued. That's when we found Bill came in and in response to his notice came to the regional board and had a discussion. And that's where the conversation did kind of switch a bit, because the board was asked, well, what do you expect the site to look like, and I had a reaction to that, because I feel we have a lot of large builders that have been building since, Lennar since 1954. Shea Homes has been building homes since the early 1900s. H.G. Fenton, 1900s here locally, and others for years, for decades. Granted, we didn't have the requirements we have now then, but in the last 10 years, we certainly have. 1990 was when the first regional stormwater. So we're working on 20 to 30 years here of stormwater requirements. And there is an expectation, the board does have an expectation, that home builders that have been building homes for decades should know their responsibilities for water quality protection. So that's when I had turned to Bill's staff and said, I would have expected you to be the poster child of how to do things right, since Lennar is one of the largest home builders in the United States, and I think the largest now in California. So that's where Bill turned around and picked up the phone after he left our office that day and said, how do we become that poster child? That's my goal. I want to do that. So I figured, since the board had the attention of the president of the regional area for Lennar, well, then let's educate. Let's enter into this conversation. So that's when I took two of my staff plus myself. We cleared our calendars for 3 days and visited 25 Lennar sites around the region, some in San Diego, some in the eastern portion of the region. And I did everything around my house that I could drive to in a 2-day period. We took a couple photos, We prepared an inspection report, and we had, like Bill said, about 18 sites. We went over each one with his senior team for building, for grading. You know, some of the key players were in that meeting that day. It took a couple hours to go through. And I think we gained a lot of ground there because I wanted a large builder like Lennar to recognize that the board was serious in having this sort of relationship. If they were willing to reach out to us, we were willing to have it. So I think we did cover a lot of ground, and we worked on reestablishing the trust. Now, granted, the board is a regulatory agency, and I am fully aware of the authorities and the enforcement power that the board holds. And I do not think that my agency uses that willy-nilly. We do not just take enforcement action against construction sites for minimal matters. And in this case, you know, we sent notices of violation, corrective measures were put in place, and that's where matters are today. Corrective measures have been put in place. So the enforcement doesn't continue, where the decisions get made not to continue. It is on those sites where the corrective action measures do not continue, there is no communication. And essentially the board's directives or requests, even, they start off as requests for corrective action with the photo documentation. It's actually very simple. And Mike and I have gone around and talked about this many times. The board's not issuing a notice of violation for a down silt fence. It's usually and most frequently a failure, a wholehearted failure. And in this case, the wholehearted failure was grading at 100-acre plus site without a permit. That's a big deal. That's not, your fiber rolls are not staked at 4 foot on center. That's not what the board is taking these large actions for. So I just want people to recognize that we are not an agency knee-jerk on something small. But when we do find wholesale non-compliance, and I have a few examples, then the enforcement can be fairly large. And so, you know, and let me give you some examples. So there's a couple of, and these are all on our websites, and they're press releases for these sorts of places. And I want to read you a couple of the quotes from not only our executive officer, David Gibson, but our senior scientist that heads the compliance oversight group. And this is really going to give you some insight into what the board expects on a site like Bill's at 3 Roots, or Shea Homes, where there's, you know, 200 plus acres open in the North County, or Otay down south, where there's hundreds of acres being developed, or in Orange County at Mission Viejo, where there Rancho Mission Viejo development, hundreds of acres. So one quote from Kiara, and these are all public information, and they're all on our website. And this is the, which site is this? This is a Sandag site. And it says, it's surprising that an organization with so much experience in linear construction projects would let this happen. We went and inspected a site, and there were no BMPs on their construction site. Again, not a down silt fence, none. You apply for a permit, you certify to the requirements to implement the controls, and there were none when the board came. That's why that was $50,000 one-time event. The San Altos site in Lemon Grove, what made this site noteworthy is that, and this is Kiara again, that there was repeat non-compliance, tells us that they didn't take the city or our inspectors very seriously. These requirements are not new. It's unfortunate that it's taking a large monetary penalty to motivate to do basic management measures that the industry considers routine for protecting downstream water quality. This site was in Lemon Grove, and there were weekly, sometimes twice a week inspections by the city inspectors. And this is where the board then conducted inspections under the CGP. Both permits similarly involve CGP plus the regional stormwater permit. And this construction site and this developer found themselves on the other end of $848,374 because they failed to do the corrective actions with a lot of attention and a lot of both board and city inspectors telling them what sort of corrective actions should be done. The next one is, this was the Casa Mera view off of I-15. It's in an enormous apartment complex. And this is from our executive officer. Our inspectors are troubled by the many instances of negligent sediment controls at construction sites. All it takes is some simple, economically viable, common sense controls that are readily available to avoid serious ecological consequences. This action is a reminder that failure to follow simple permit requirements can have serious fiscal consequences. So again, this is not rocket science. These are effective combination of sediment and erosion controls. And I read those to you because it's a real indicator of where Dave Gibson's mindset is at and where the water board's mindset are at in terms of expectations. So that's why when Bill reached out to me, I decided to clear the deck and go for it in terms of education. Now, another thing that is really important for this group to understand is that it is imperative for you to know where you're located in the region. In the case of Three Roots, the reason why we were out there is that this is a very large construction site in a high priority watershed. And I'm going to share with you my screen because the Three Roots site is greater than 100 acres worth of development over many years. It's going to be there for a while, and it discharges to a TMDL impaired watershed for sediment. So my ask to this group is, if you know your sites discharge to a water body that is impaired for sediment, it is really important that you assure that your controls are in place, because this is a high priority for the water board as well. So let me show you some of the tools that we use.
Lori, while you do that, explain just briefly, what's a high priority watershed?
Well, that's a great question. And it can take okay, I can't talk and let me share and then I'll continue talking. Let me share my screen. Okay. Does everybody see the map of the region?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So Mike, to answer your question, a high priority watershed can be certainly for construction. We're talking construction. Construction discharges sediment. So if there's a receiving water that's impaired for sediment, that would be considered a high priority. High priority can also mean a very large construction site. We have our inventory. This map is of our region, and the blue circles are only those construction sites that are greater than 80 acres. You might be able to see to the left, it's between 80 and 100 acres. And I did that to capture a couple of sites I want to show today. And these are the level 2, level 3 risk. So if you're a level 3, you are a high priority site. If you're a level 2 and a large site that discharges to an impaired water body, you're a high priority. Again, it can change, but usually size and location within the region and discharging to a sediment impaired water body is going to get you to be a high priority site. You could actually be a high priority site if the site is just really recalcitrant in a lot of ways. We have municipalities reach out to us and ask us for assistance because they have elevated their enforcement to a point, to a high point, and they're still not getting compliance. So let me show you here. I have the impaired water bodies I can click on and off for our region and the TMDL watershed. In this case, we're talking sediment, and so I'm really looking at the Los Penasquitos watershed. So if your construction sites are within
That's what's highlighted in like the darker pink.
that's correct. This is the Los Penasquitos watershed right here. Here's the Three Roots site. I'm going to turn off the watershed. So there's, you can see the Three Roots site. It tells me that there's 230 acres disturbed, and it's a risk level 2 site. So this is some of the tools that I use to screen, to prioritize where my inspectors go for inspections, because the water board is trying to prioritize our resources based on water quality. There's a lot of other things that the board does use to prioritize. For example, like in the industrial general permit program, I may prioritize those sites that have never taken a water quality sample, which is absolutely wrong. And those sites need some of our attention as well, because they are blanketedly not complying with the permit requirements. So I just wanted to show you that these are some of the tools that we use to prioritize. And it's based off these receiving water bodies and size and some of the other factors that I mentioned. I also want to mention that, you know, let me quit sharing for a second. Let's see. Sorry about that. I gotta get the, okay, gotta click the right button. Another aspect that's important to the water board is, you know, we developed a practical vision 7 or 8 years ago. And so I often wonder what the developers feel as far as what are their values. And when I went and looked at that for Lennar's, I recognized, you know, really Lennar mentioned, took a lot of time on their website to express what their culture was like and their values. And, you know, they're committed to doing the right thing for the right reason. And they are, you know, they're dedicated to be an innovator through a level of integrity, both for their customers as well as the environment. So that tells me that a company like Lennar is very much aligned with what the values are of the water board. Part of my willingness to enter into the discussions with Bill, and now some of the discussions we're going to do things different going forward with the city, is that the water board values communication and transparency. And that, honestly, those are my 2 largest values that I identify with out of the 4 that the water board exhibits, which is also stewardship. And our other one, I always forget the other one, leadership, maybe just because it's a default for me. But and as also as part of the communication with Bill and his team, is that I recognize that my priority and the water board's priority is protection of water quality. I also realize when home builders develop sites, we are only one aspect of all of the many things that they are paying attention to when they develop land. But there are some points in time in their development process where protection of water quality is got to be the number 1 or number 2. We're not always that way. When you're grading 200 acres worth of land plus, we should be on the high priority of your checklists for your days. And especially when we were just in the middle of a rain event for a week. We're scheduled for atmospheric rivers the end of the week. So when my inspectors go out, which we usually do right before these rain events, or your sites might get these notices from the city of Chula Vista sends them out, these reminders, the rain season is here, check your BMPs, that kind of thing. You get reminders. I know the sites get reminders. So if the water board comes to these sites and there is no BMPs at all, and I'm going to use this example because I was the inspector on this site. Again, this is all public information. This happened a while ago. In the city of Encinitas, they were developing a park along the I-5 freeway. And we got a complaint from a member of a citizen with videos. This is another thing the developers, I know they're aware of. There's so much technology people have out there and that they send the water board videos and photos. So I was the inspector and responded to this when I got, that was a 40-acre park. 40 acre? Maybe getting my acreage wrong. It's large and flat. It was generally flat. There was no BMPs on the site at all. Now this is a CIP project, a large project with a high profile. So it made no sense that the city did not require their contractor to have BMPs. Both entities should have known better. And the corrective actions were very slow on the city's part and very slow on the developer's part. I don't mean to throw the city of Encinitas under the bus, but this cost the city a lot, almost $500,000, $430,000. And this was the quote out of this one. It's this mismanagement at this construction site was really unexpected given the level of experience of both the contractor and the city. And that's when Bill came in, that's where my initial reaction was, what do you mean you're asking me what you should have out at your site? So there is a little bit of that, but even having said that, the board is willing, and I want to share one thing because I know I have taken more time, but let me share one last thing and then I'm going to stop talking and we can take questions. Okay. As a result of, does everybody see the screen? I just want to check.
Yes.
Okay. So as a result of reestablishing and reopening this communication with the board, I've been with the board 27 years. And when I first came to the board, I will agree with what the opening statement was for Mike, where, the board was unapproachable. We were a different agency back then. And I would say we've adapted and our leadership has changed and our culture has changed too. We didn't have the values of leadership, stewardship, communication, and transparency back then. No way. But we do now. So I do encourage you, even with my program or Eric Becker's program, which I know impacts the land development and this group's work very much. Eric is very open to early communication and getting applications under the 401 Water Quality Certification Program to be good ones coming in, so it makes our review faster. But as an outcome of Bill and I's and the city's communication, Bill offered up access to his site. And these are CCTV cameras that are located at the 3 Roots site, and the water board has access to these, and we can view these and give feedback, real-time feedback to Bill and his team on, the new Ryan, the new team at 3 Roots.
So Lori, I just wanted everybody to notice the timestamp on the camera. That's this morning.
Yep, and if I refresh it, it will probably, it's real time. So let's see if it refreshes. 10:31. So it's a little bit delayed, but we have, so Bill was willing and we were as well to give us these access so we can tell him when we perform our inspections, which we usually do right before the rain event, anything that we might see, and they can get out there and correct it right away. The city of San Diego has partnered with us on their pure water project. And my inspector Whitney talks with Harry on a regular basis, and there's corrective action measures that occur that day. The outcome of that is what Bill was saying. It's cheaper for the site. There's no stop works that go on, and water quality gets protected, because once a site of this size begins to fail, it is almost impossible to catch up during the rain event. you cannot do it. On one of the sites where we had taken an enforcement action, it took a month to get the site in shape to be protected, to be able to hold during a rain when it happens 4 days in a row. You cannot catch up on these sites. And I know all the professionals on this call know that. The next thing is Bill said that he reached out to Paul Barnes with Shea Homes. This site is in the North San Diego County along Highway 78. These are drone footages we get each week. And we get an email each week, and my inspector does an inspection of this site once a week. And we can drill down and look at things, whether it's an entrance or the silt fence or the protection of this corridor here. And we have really, during this last rain event, been able to reach out to Paul and his team up here at the North City site or the Discovery site and give any sort of feedback. So this technology is something that the board has partnered with these large sites and is willing to do on your site. And it is a much more open way to communicate, and water quality gets protected real time. And a lot of the benefits Bill mentioned are because of this type of free flowing communication and feedback from the board to the site. And I always mention to the sites and to Bill very clearly that although I cannot guarantee you that the board will not take an enforcement action. I don't have the authority to do that. But with this sort of open back and forth communication, the likelihood of a large enforcement action of any of those examples that I gave you is non-existent because the communication is so free flowing. And I'm going to stop here. I could talk forever, but I'm going to stop and answer any questions or see if Bill or George or Sean want to add anything or at this point.
Maybe just one comment off of your last comments. I did talk to Paul Barnes yesterday. He wasn't able to make the call today because he had some corporate commitments, but he shared with me a story that the video and the communication back and forth, I think it was last Friday, that you guys identified some stuff on site. And Paul said, we immediately got on the phone with the team and immediately started implementing the corrections that we needed to take. So it was very, very simple, very, I'll say cooperative, very team-oriented approach to just getting the site buttoned up. So I know he wanted me to convey his appreciation of the way it's working, and as an example of how this communication and openness has helped our business.
So I've got some questions. My first one would be, so if you're a developer and you've got a project and you're not even you're in the pipeline, does it make sense to meet with the regional board before you get your permits to give you a heads up? Here's where we are. This is what we're intending to do, so that they can get schooled up on building that relationship with you, and then having a better understanding of what the expectation is, so that they can find out, okay, you're in a water shed like Los Penasquitos that has a sediment problem. And I guess, in layman's terms, since I'm the layman on the call, the problem is there's so much sediment that goes down there that it plugs things up, and then it causes not only flooding, but then the sediment also affects the environment. So, is there a value to not only the regional board, but to our industry to have early enough meetings to get a better understanding and to start that collaborative relationship?
I mean, the simple answer is yes. I'm all for always meeting with people and understanding what's going on. We're taking it to another level, and that, not only those type of meetings, but also just before we start construction, where we're engaging our field people. We've now talked with the regional board and also the city of San Diego, that where there's availability for staff to make it, when we have pre-construction meetings for starting and grading our undergrounds, those meetings required with the city, that we would also invite the regional board to be there. Because part of it to me is, it's identifying what the concerns are and making sure everything's in place, but it's also an education. for our people in the field. And this whole discussion, like Lori shared with us about the different basins and the water quality and the concerns and what it does for the environment, I think is important to be shared at that level also. So I think I'll let Lori answer, but I think the more communication, always the better, because you always hate to assume anything. And again, everybody seems to be very open and very team oriented. So I'd suggest it.
Yeah, I think my response on this is it would depend. I don't think that anybody has the capacity to meet on every site. There are sites that it would be valuable, large sites that are going to do a lot of mass grading in these high priority watershed areas, and where this sort of intercommunication would be beneficial. A smaller site that's a shorter construction, even if it's in a high priority watershed, I would say probably that's not the best use of everybody's time. If there was a specific question, we would help, but there is a level of expectation on some of the smaller sites. There are a lot of qualified SWIP preparers and developers out there that do a really good job. Where I think is the important part is that the leadership write good contracts, have good expectations of their subs, and then empower the people on the site to get the BMPs in place when it's time to get the BMPs in place. And then run a good site, manage it. Good housekeeping and good BMP management goes a very long way.
So I've got a couple of questions regarding the cameras. I'm interested if the water board is using on-site cameras for their review of job sites for their inspections. And then a follow-up question that kind of ties in with it is, who else has access to the information from the TV cameras? And if they're real time, are they kept in some sort of a file?
Okay, so the water board has been granted access by the site, by the legally responsible party. In the case of Three Roots, it was Lennar and the team. In the case of the city of San Diego, it was a voluntary. All of these are voluntary allowances. The board has been given a link and we have a password, and we were given that information from Bill and his team, or in the case of the North County, from Paul Barnes and his team. And in the case of the city of San Diego's, it was the city's granted us access. When we do an inspection, we take a screenshot of what we are looking at, and we provide a narrative information about if a corrective action, or if we see a potential violation, we will note it, and we will send an email to the LRP on file and our contact people, because we've been in contact with either the city or Bill's group or Paul's, and we send them an email and do the screenshot. That email is then uploaded to Smarts, so it is public record at that point. We haven't done videos or anything like that. It's been screenshots, because honestly, the corrective actions occur that day and we get an email back, and then the email gets put into Smarts and our ECM system. And that's public information as well. That's where we're at thus far.
Next question. Lori, any of the other regional boards operating a similar data visualization database?
Data visualization database. Okay, other regions do use technology like this. I know some Region 4 was doing inspections using like FaceTime, at wastewater treatment plants. I'm not aware of anybody using this sort of technology for construction sites yet.
Why aren't QSDs and QSPs communicated with prior to site inspection by the regional board? It's my experience that better communication and outcomes are generated when the SWIP professionals are included versus a site project manager.
Okay, sometimes we do reach out to the site and let them know we're coming, and sometimes we don't. Because what happens is everybody cleans house before their guests come, and which is great because the environment benefits from that. And I'm okay with that too sometimes. But what we do is we reach out to the LRP and the people that are identified in SMARTS. And if we know that the QSP or QSD is on there, sometimes they just are identified as a data, whatever SMARTS calls them, a data updater or something like that, that can upload data. But if we know the QSP and QSD, we will reach out to them, but we don't, as a matter of practice, let everybody know we're coming all the time. Larger sites, like I said, we typically do let them know we're coming. And
Okay.
it's usually a function too of what the LRP wants. So
Right.
they're the ones that are responsible, not necessarily the QSP or D. So we would expect that communication from the site manager to be happening with the QSP and D as well.
Okay, I got a couple other questions and we're 7 minutes from our ending time. So I want to try and see if we can squeeze this question in before we get your final comments and then whatever questions we'll pick up. Water quality is an important environmental consideration. However, the county is largely developed from the coast to beyond the I-15 corridor. New development incurs a very significant cost, but the amount of acreage for new development in comparison to the amount of existing development is very, very small. How is it possible to truly improve water quality without including existing development into the equation?
Great question. Existing development is factored into the equation, and that is part of the responsibilities of each municipality that has a coverage, which they all do, under the regional MS4 permit. There's land development requirements under the regional MS4 permit that anytime an existing piece of property gets redeveloped, there's all kinds of criteria that put them into needing to comply with stormwater requirements. And Sean and George are very familiar with those, and that's where you trigger the priority development project requirements, and post-construction are required to be placed on the facilities to treat stormwater pollutant control as well as hydromodification.
Okay. All right. So what I'd like to do is, Bill, I want you to give some final thoughts, and then George, Sean, and then we'll finish with Lori, and then we'll finish up any other questions. If those of you that need to hit the road at 11 o'clock and want to log off, that's great. Otherwise, stick around. So go ahead, Bill.
I just want to reemphasize, a lot of this has been simplified, has been the angst out of this part of the business has been taken away for us. And it's all because of the communication and the willingness of the board and the city to engage on these things. It doesn't have to be what I think a lot of us thought it was, in getting to the solutions for everybody. So again, it's all about, communicating. It's all about just putting it on the table and looking for those solutions. I think you've got, the parties are in place that'll do that with you. So I encourage you to engage and do what's necessary to keep your projects going.
And it's your opinion that your experience with Lennar on these projects and working with the regional board has not only benefited your company, but you had told me offline that you ended up staying within your budget on what you had anticipated your costs would be.
Yeah, it's the cost. We've seen the cost savings, just the focus on the work. I mean, as Lori brought up, we've got a lot of things to manage in developing a site, building homes. So there's a lot of things, but our people are better educated and have a better feel for what's needed, even though they've been trained with this communication. They've been able to get a tighter site and not to overreact and do what's necessary to deliver the clean water. So
okay, Sean, George.
Yes, thank you, Mike. It's these are great discussions. I'm enjoying this discussion. I think it takes all of us to collaborate for us to succeed. And it's very important for me, you know, as a result of this discussion here, to promote transparency. I mean, we have to be transparent. We have to have the communication and the coordination really to ensure compliance with local and regional stormwater requirement. And it is very important. I mean, these kind of opens the door for us to communicate. You know, now you know the players, whether it's on the city side or on the board side. You know, we're open to communicate with you. We're letting you know that if you're gonna call on us to be proactive and ask questions, we're gonna be there for you. You know, even like Bill mentioned, if we're going to be part of the pre-construction meeting, you know, and it's a significant project, you know, priority project, as Lori mentioned, we'll be there, you know, but until we get there, that communication will make a determination whether that project, you know, is a priority, and we need to be involved at that stage. But communication is a key. We're here to support the industry, and very happy to be part of this discussion. Thank you, Mike.
Sean?
Yeah, I just want to add one thing, just for everybody out there. In the case of the 3 routes, it's really important to know the limits of the SWIP and what kind of SWIP coverage your site is going to be basically controlling. In the case of the 3 route site, there was a mining operation. So, you know, the thought was, hey, we have a SWIP, we should be covered. But, you know, in actuality, that SWIP coverage covers a different part of that industrial activity, and it didn't necessarily cover the construction general permit activities that were occurring at the same time. So know the limits of your SWIP, know what type of SWIP coverage you have for your site. That's my advice to the group at this time.
Hey, Lori?
Yeah, know where you're at in the region, know which watershed you're in, know which receiving water you discharge to, and you hire professionals to do that. The QSD is developing the site, needs to calculate a risk. That's part of the reason why that requirement was there, because it makes that professional look at the receiving water. So if you're a risk level 2 or 3, which many of our sites, you saw how many were in our region, are at that level, then it's really incumbent upon you to know that you have perhaps a complicated site, or you know you're going to be grading over 2 wet seasons, or you know you're discharging to some sensitive water body or in a TMDL watershed for sediment. So anybody in the LOSPEN should be reviewing things and making sure that they just manage their site using good practices, adaptive management, and if there's anything unique, reach out to your jurisdiction and the board if there's something that you feel some sort of collaborative meeting like this would be beneficial. Then I do recommend it. Smaller sites, I do think that the site should be self-sufficient and be able to do it on their own and have an inspection by either the board or the city and be able to have a good outcome. And if we really do want to protect the environment and actually live the values that the companies present on their website and the board as well, I'm trying to put our actions where our kind of, you know, your money where your mouth is. I'm just trying to translate that, but I'm trying to put the actions of the stormwater staff and the board behind what our values are. And that is communication and transparency. We are public servants. We are here to help you develop your site in accordance with the water quality laws. And myself and my staff know that there are a lot of things that development sites of this size have to manage. And we're just one of them. And we'll do our best to help you manage that effectively.
Perfect. It's exactly 11 o'clock. All right, we got a couple more questions. Let's see. I applaud Lennard's efforts to take these proactive steps to compliance with Lori and the regional board team, exclamation point. Lori, can you speak to the structure for fines on an active construction site? Was the city of Encinitas fine at $430,000 all at once, or was it a cumulative fine? Meaning, you know, this snowballed to this, which snowballed to this to get there, or was it one big?
Well, for the city of San Diego, correction, for the city of Encinitas Park project, That was multiple violations for really a failure to have effective combination of erosion and sediment controls. And it was per day. So our enforcement policies, public information, and you can read how the board will walk through an enforcement action. They start off with notices of violations, and if there's a failure to correct and a continued inspection, we do multiple inspections, give opportunity for corrective action. And when the corrective actions don't happen, that's usually where we'll stop something and move it and elevate it to an enforcement action. All enforcement actions get weighed. All construction, stormwater, and enforcement actions get weighed with all enforcement actions that the water board takes. It goes through a process through our compliance oversight group and gets evaluated by upper management, and this decision is made then to take the ACL. But construction stormwater violations are very visible and they have a lot of impact immediately. So that one for the city of Encinitas was after, it was both to the city of Encinitas and their developer because it was a CIP project. So the violations were for multiple violations of the CGP that added up over a defined period of time of, I think, a year or two, and a fine was taken for a one-time action.
Okay. Pat's got a question. Besides complying with erosion controls and inspections required by the SWIP, what advice would you give to smaller size or lower risk level projects?
Good housekeeping and preparation. Our rain events, when large rain events happen, we all know about them. And you have to stop what you're doing and prepare your site based on the size of your site. With smaller sites, maybe a half a day is enough time. With a site like 3 Roots, no way. It took weeks to get that site with the proper controls going forward. And then as you manage your site and things change, your BMPs need to change as well. Mass grade is one thing. Basins and weirs and will be what you use with risers. When 3 Roots starts developing and the storm drain systems get connected, then it's a different ballgame and you have to use different measures and make sure they're maintained so that they're effective. I say this a lot too. The construction stormwater permit is a permit to discharge. You're allowed to discharge. You just have to do so with the proper controls in place. It can't be none when we get on the site. It has to be that effective combination. And then if there's a discharge, then it can be in compliance with the requirements.
Okay. Let's see, next one. Why reducing risk levels, for example, level 2 to level 1, is not permissible, though all permit horizontal and perimeter improvements are completed and functional? So why can't you reduce the risk once you've got those permanent things in place?
Because risk is, the factors that go into the risk calculation are the duration of time that the construction site will be active. And that doesn't change. That's why we also don't change start dates. A lot of times people want us to change the start date because they pulled a permit, but the construction really didn't start. And so you have to manage going forward a little bit as best as you can. I recognize things do change. I recognize that sometimes you don't get your permits on another. It is something, but we do not go down in risk because of the way the risk is calculated. Like I said, duration, where you're located within the region, and the types of soils that you have. That's what goes into a risk calculation. That doesn't change. You put your controls in place, and then your discharges are of a better quality to allow you to discharge under your permit. That's the point of the controls.
Okay, here's one that it may be more for the city than for the board. We have city inspectors whom expect the QSP to be able to walk the site with them multiple times per week and ask that the QSP make sure we get the site into compliance. However, when hired as a QSP consultant, the client doesn't typically want to or plan to pay their QSP to come on the site several times per week, parentheses, when there isn't rain. And it seems city inspectors do not understand the limitations of QSPs being able to actually install BMPs themselves. There seems to be a disconnect between the MS4 permit expectations and the CGP expectations. How do you suggest best dealing with this for consultants?
That's a great question. Sean or George? I have an answer, but I'll let you guys go first.
And my recommendation is get that written into the contract when you accept the project. It's really the QSPs, the boots on the ground. They're the ones that are actually going to be making recommendations on what needs to get fixed and how to best manage your, water pollution control plan or your SWIP. But that would be my advice. And coming from also on the private side, because I was a QSP inspector, there is that nexus of how much money do you put into the contract to do and manage your SWIP effectively. So it's really a discussion between the consultant and the property owner or the project owner. So that's.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And that also, like for, and I hope the people at Bill's level are still on the call, but I think it starts from the top. And when Bill or Paul, when the president of the region for the large developers, and I grant it, there's all kinds of sizes of developments, but it's when the LRP makes the decision to run the site well, is when the QSP gets empowered to and feels like they're being listened to, and they say, hey, we need to refresh these silt fences today, now, this afternoon, before it rains. We're 72 hours prior, and the site superintendent says, get off my site, I don't want to listen to you. Which I had documentation on one particular site where that was actually said. The site manager told me to not do his job and kicked me off the site, and I had that as evidence that says, you are not doing your BMPs because you're told your QSP to take a hike. And the contract will help, and I believe it goes down to the manager and then above the manager to get the empowerment to take the actions, the QSP.
All right. So there's a follow-up here from Dave. And I think I want to throw this to Bill to answer first. So Dave says, okay, to that effect, low bid wins and drives overall quality down.
I don't find that to be true in our group. We actually have, based on our size here in San Diego, we actually have a person on staff that actually drives all our properties on a daily basis and submits a report up to the senior management. We're not looking for low bids. We're looking for qualified people to do it at a reasonable price, but at the same time, it's getting it done.
Okay, to the city staff, same thing. With public contracts, lowest bidder that qualifies gets the job. So there again, how do you guys square that circle?
Well, definitely, we look at the qualifications, Mike, and we want to make sure that the job is being done, and it's typically very detailed in the contract, as Sean and Lori has been mentioning. From a CIP perspective, we make sure that it's very detailed, and there's qualified, and pricing is something that gets evaluated as a whole, not specific to this. But typically, we make sure that we have the qualified personnel associated with the tasks being asked to be addressed.
And I have two comments on that. Number one, I've had conversations with Caltrans and asked, what do you need me to do? How can I help you get rid of this particular contractor because they're terrible? The site looked horrendous. What letter do I write? That's uphill battle. It's that's hard for Caltrans, and I just offered to help wherever I could. The other comment I have is it's my understanding in response to the NOV in 2015 that the board took, that the city experienced, the real big one when it came to the construction program, that a corrective measure that the city of San Diego put in place was very specific, that if a contractor, and George or Sean, I don't know if you were there, but you probably know this, that if a contractor failed in a large way, they were banned from bidding a city project for 2 years if they got I'm not going to use the right term for the city of San Diego, but it's my understanding if the city issues a corrective measure to a contractor, they could find themselves on this list and then not be able to bid projects for 2 years, something like that.
Yes, actually, I'm not privy to these type of details. It's completely different department that handles
Right.
the contracting
Yes.
aspect.
Yeah.
But I know that, you know, if some kind of correction action that's been taken on a certain task and hasn't been addressed correctly by the consultant, you know, they take some measures, corrective measures for future consideration on their proposals. But I'm not privy to the detail or how they approach it.
Okay, I've got a follow-up to an earlier question. So the person wants me to read the question first, and then I'll read their follow-up. So the original question, and Lori answered it, water quality is important environmental consideration. However, the county is largely developed from coast to beyond the 15 corridor. New development incurs a very significant cost, but the amount of acreage for new development in comparison to the amount of existing development is very, very small. How is it possible to improve the water quality without including the existing development in the equation? And the follow-up is, I don't think Lori understood or answered it correctly. The existing developed area, meaning things that are already built, not potential small projects and what triggers a PDP. If we're only developing on 2,000 to 3,000 acres countywide at any one time, and we have hundreds of thousands of acres of already built environment and pollutants flow off that, how is the amount of money spent on these new sites improving water quality to where it can actually be measured compared to no BMPs on everything else that's been built?
That's a good point. Slowly, very slowly, when existing development gets retrofitted, or the regional MS4 permit has a program called alternative compliance, where if controls can't be placed on site, typically in the past, that project died. It didn't get built. But now municipalities have been given an option to develop an alternative compliance program and implement the controls off-site to treat those pollutants. And in my opinion, it is building communities with more LID, with more source control, with more attention being given to environmental issues, particularly water quality. Now, solar is really easy, or energy efficiency. A lot of the developments are including that, but water quality controls on new development, they'll have them because it's required, but it's a slow process on the existing development, very slow.
Okay. All right, that was our last question. I want to thank all of our panelists for attending. For those of you out there in viewer land, I hope that this was beneficial for you. You know, I think that in the coming months this year, we may have some sort of a follow-up. If you're not part of the BIA Stormwater Task Force, and or let's say your company, this is the first time that you've heard more specifics about this, that's why we have this committee at the BIA. So I would encourage any of the development companies, if you don't have a senior staff person or somebody assigned to that committee at the BIA, send me an email, send me who you want on that committee, and I'll get them signed up. Again, George, Sean, thank you for your collaboration and work at the city. I know you're both new in your positions, and hopefully for you, George, you'll no longer be interim, but you'll be the full-on deputy. And Lori, thank you again. It's been a pleasure to work with you for my 8 years here at the BIA. And Bill, thank you for bringing this to Bora's attention and getting this scheduled. We wish you well in your retirement. And as I've told you and tell everybody out there, when you're in the BIA, it's kind of like the mafia. Once you get out, we find a way to pull you back in. So thanks, everybody, and we'll call it a day.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it.
Mike,
All right.
bye-bye.
Bye.